Hi. I just want to answer a couple of questions before I begin because I know they're burning in your minds and I want to make sure that I have enough time. Can you all hear me?
No.
Do I have to go through that again? Hi. The two questions that I want to answer for you before I begin are, I'm 73 and I weigh 140. More or less. I'm not telling you which one. That was delightful to listen to Dr. Summers. I think I'm going to go home and throw away my Advil. And I think he said something about buying a new pair of jeans. That sounds pretty good to me. And the other things I'm sure will just kind of take care of themselves. The thought of not eating any more sugars doesn't please me very much. And I do have type 2 diabetes, but I figured out how to do it with the chocolate. I want to share a little story with you. It goes back to the early 70s, and as I look around, I realize that many of you weren't around in the early 70s. But I was, and I was out to dinner with my husband and our best friends one night. And it was at a time when I was 9 months pregnant and had gained 546 pounds, all in the front. My friend leaned across the table and she said to me, "How are you feeling?" And I patted my tummy and said, "Well, all things considered, I'm okay." Actually, Jason was born the very next day. I think it was the food in the restaurant. But she asked me how I felt, and I said, fairly well. And my husband turned and looked at me, and he said, "Well, what's the matter with you?" And I said, "She's talking about the baby, that's all." And he said, "The baby? Why didn't you tell me first?" He had forgotten. He had forgotten that we were having little Jason. He had Alzheimer's disease, and he left us at 47 years old. Yeah, that's an O if there ever was one. However, part of the reason that I'm here today is to show you that, yeah, you can get through this. You can get through it with a smile and with help. And when I say with help, I say get a good diagnosis if you suspect it. Walk out the door from your neurologist and walk into your attorney's office, please. Then get to the Alzheimer's Association. None of those existed back in the 70s. The saving grace for all of us is the Alzheimer's Association. When you think of the things we need the most, help, yes, and education, yes, and support. I think back to the fact that when anybody asked me how I was doing in those early days, I always said, "I'm fine." How many of you are just fine? Yeah, we're fine. Of course we are. We need help. No, we're fine. And it was early this year when I was doing a support group, and I started the support group by saying, "How is everyone?" And everyone said they were fine. And I realized what fine means. Frustrated, isolated, numb, and exhausted. F-I-N-E. Back at you. Another time, I sat down for lunch at a favorite restaurant. We had a restaurant on the South Shore that we went to several times a week, almost every week, and we had lovingly referred to it as the soup kitchen on the South Shore. And we sat down to eat for the second time that week. And Charlie looked at me over the top of his reading glasses. He had a way of looking at me over the top of his reading glasses that usually meant I had said something incorrectly. He didn't need the reading glasses anymore because he wasn't reading. But he wears them all the time. And he said to me as we sat there, pass the glue. And I gave him the sugar. And he put, I don't know, 8 or 9 teaspoons into his coffee. And then he said, pass the ginger. And I gave him the salt, thinking, well, I didn't know what he wanted the ginger for, but of course, silly me. Added that to the coffee. And then we ordered. And a young waitress came over and asked me what I wanted to drink. And then she said, and what does he want? Ask him, I said. And he looked up at her and he said, I'll have rose bush, thank you. And I said, 2 ginger ales. I thought that was a pretty good way of doing it. At that moment, the soup came and he stood up and he said, let's go, I'm tired. You know what I'd like to do? I'd like to go to the soup kitchen. And I said, right on, so would I. And we left. We came back the next week. Many of you have had those conversations, I'm sure. We can do 2 things with them. So if we get somebody laughing, they're still going to be laughing at the end of the day. Have no idea why they're laughing, but that doesn't matter. So the beauty of telling a joke to an Alzheimer person is if they're really a good joke, they're going to say, tell us again next week. I really like that one. Because they're not going to remember it, and they're aware of it. I'm sure you don't labor under the delusion that Alzheimer's people don't know they're forgetful. Indeed, they do, and I've never met an Alzheimer person who doesn't know that something is radically wrong. But I think I ought to share this with you, and the reason I'm going to share it is because I talked to my 16-year-old grandson who lives in Bethesda. I talk to him almost every morning. He calls to cheer me up. And he said this morning, what are you going to do today? I said, I'm making a presentation. And he said, oh no, not on Alzheimer's, that's so boring. And I said, well, it's boring because you've been listening to me say that for 16 years. That's the only reason. He said, please tell them a joke. You got to grab the audience, Mama. And I thought to myself, I've been doing this for 35 years, and he's 60. Okay, here's the joke. This is the joke that Alzheimer patients have said to me, tell me again and again and again, because they love it. Now, 50% of you have already heard this, so you don't have to listen. This is for the other 50%. 3 elderly ladies sitting at the dining room table, and one says, I'm going to take a bath. And she goes upstairs, and about 15 minutes later, she yells down, girls, was I getting into the bathtub, or was I getting out? And sister number 2, Abigail, says, oh, please, I'll go help her, I'll go help her. And she leaves and starts up the stairs and yells down, Madeline, was I going upstairs or was I coming down? And Madeline is now sitting alone at the dining room table and she says, oh, please, don't ever let me get like them, knock on wood. Come in. It's how you look at things. How are you going to look at this diagnosis of Alzheimer's? Have you all heard about the woman who woke up one morning, looked in the mirror, and saw she only had 3 hairs left? She said, I think I'll braid my hair today. Next day she got up, she only had 2, and she said, oh, this morning I'm going to part it in the middle. 3rd day, 1 hair, ponytail. 3rd day, 4th day, no hair whatsoever, bald. And she said, thank goodness I don't have to worry about a hairdo today. I love that story. I just love it. Because I think that's how we're going to look at Alzheimer's if we're going to be successful and successful as we can be. Each of us, here's something I'm glad you're all sitting down for. Every one of us is unique. Bet you didn't know that. Here's another one that's going to really knock your socks off. You ready? Every marriage was not made in heaven. How we come in to our caregiving makes a tremendous difference. And we have to look at our previous relationship with the person, whether it is our parent, or our husband, or our next door neighbor, whoever it is. What is our history with this patient? Because it's going to make a difference in how we become caregivers. I think the turning point, one of the questions I get asked most frequently is, when do I know when it's time to place the person in either nursing home or assisted living, or when do I know when it's time? And my standard answer is, when you open the front door to where the person is and you don't want to go in, even if it's for a split second, it's time for someone else. The most important story I learned in my caregiving was, of course, from my husband. And it was one evening when we were getting ready for dinner and the children had been seated and the high chair was pulled up and Charlie was standing there. And I said, sit down, we're going to have dinner. And he looked at me and I said, sit down, we're going to have dinner. How many of you are parents? Oh, then you already know. You grin and grit your teeth at the same time? Yeah, that's what I did. Grit my teeth and smile. And said, please sit down. And it gets louder every time, you know that. A lot of repetition with Alzheimer's people. They tend to ask the same question over and over, and we just talk louder because maybe they'll understand us then. That's rather like if you don't understand Russian and I speak to you louder in Russian. I don't expect you to understand. And so I finally, on the 5th try, said to Charlie, will you just sit down because I love you? Isn't that a good, that's what we say to our teenagers. I love you, that's a good reason. Just sit down, I love you. And he turned and looked at me and he pointed at my eyes. And he said, they don't. My eyes did not love him, is what he was saying. My eyes did not love him. My Lord, I think for that split second while I was standing there frustrated and tired and isolated and a little numb, and maybe I didn't love him all that I should at that second. 2 seconds later, I loved him with all my heart. But he recognized my body language. My words didn't matter. Take that home with you. The words aren't important anymore. What's important is what is the other message that you are giving. Any of you stay up late last night? We saw a lot of messages, didn't we? And I know that when I turned off the television and was watching, I still knew what the messages were. Why? Body language, and I'm not particularly good at it. I have learned to try to read people's body language as best I could. But that message to me was so important. And what I did from then on was I tried not to listen to his words. And thank heavens, because what happened to my husband can happen to some of yours. And it is that he had a major stroke, because he had dual diagnosis. He had vascular dementia as well as Alzheimer's. And he lost all his language. He lost all his language except the word on. On for everything. Actually, he could use on in sentences. He would look at the children and say, on, and they would quickly go make their bed or pick up their clothes. They knew. He could look at me and say, oh, never mind. And he could do it in wonderful, wonderful sentences. And there was an on that was a definite no, and an on that was I don't know. And I learned that listening to the ons wasn't going to help me. But seeing what his body language was made all the difference in the world. That was 35 years ago. And I have used that piece of information for 35 years and will continue to try to share it with as many people as will listen. I gave you a handout. I thought it was fabulous that dear Donna printed them on purple, because purple, you know, is the Alzheimer's color. And one of them, on the inside I think it is how to have a positive conversation with an Alzheimer person. Let me ask you with hands, please. How many of you have difficulty chatting with your Alzheimer person, either getting them to understand or understanding them all the time, %? This is a helpful way to not only be able to have a conversation, but what I'm suggesting to you is that you copy it, and everyone who comes through your door, hand them a copy. Because other people need to know how to speak to the Alzheimer person. And go back and I think about that one feeling that is fine, F-I-N-E, and that is the I for isolation. Isolation is something that happens to Alzheimer's caregivers, and it happens primarily because the people visiting don't know how to react to an Alzheimer person, and so what do? They tend to stop visiting. And we're telling them all the time that we're just fine, we're okay. And then when they stop visiting, there is this horrendous thing we go through of isolation. I had somebody tell me the other day that she actually felt angry at her neighbors when she sees them having a good time. Imagine feeling that way. There are many wonderful things that I have brought home from my support groups over the years, and I'm trying to put them together in hopes that I can share all of them with you once I have permission, or I lie about what their names are. The other one is the 5 tenets. It's the front page. And I hope when you have time, you will go home and look at this. Because, let me tell you in the first place what habilitation is. It is a kind of care partnering. I like the word care partner, by the way, because I don't really think you have to care to be a caregiver. But I think you have to care to be a care partner, to partner in this journey you're going to have together, a care partner. And these are 5 simple things that you can do to change the care partnering experience, to make it the best it can be, and that's going to be different for each and every one of you. It's going to be a unique journey, but it is a journey, and that's what you need to get through with suggestions. And the first one is to simplify the environment. We cannot say that enough times. Make the environment around the person as simple as it can possibly be. What do you think in the environment causes most problems with Alzheimer people? What is it? What part of the environment do you think? Any ideas? No, but a good one. No, it is lighting. You ever heard of sundowning? I love sharing this story. It goes back many, many years ago. And I had gone to a meeting with a group of neurologists, and we were talking about sundowning and what happens when people sundown. I had, at the time, designed a long-term care unit specifically for Alzheimer people. And we talked, and the conversation was all about the medications. What do we use to control sundowning? I had brought a young nursing assistant with me because I think most of them walk on water. And I brought this nursing assistant with me, and she was sitting very quietly. And the doctors went on talking about the medications, and I think they might have said to me, which one do you think works best for your people? And I said, and that was that. And then this little girl put up her hand and she said, excuse me, but if we're talking about sundowning, why doesn't somebody turn up the lights? Hello? Why doesn't somebody turn up the lights? Now the message in there was not to go from a 50-watt bulb to a 100-watt bulb. but it was to mimic daylight. Now what happens if we mimic daylight? What do you think happens to sundown? It diminishes tremendously. And sundowning isn't a fun thing because it usually does happen after the sun goes down, which makes it very, very difficult because people's personality changes. This is when aggression happens. This is when eloping happens. Don't you love that word, eloping? Yeah. We used to say getting away. He used to run away at 5 o'clock. Now he elopes, which is wonderful. So get those bulbs. They cost exactly the same as regular bulbs do. They're called daylight bulbs. Put them in your homes, put them in your office, put them in anywhere that somebody might sundown. You know when the time to do that is? Not when Dad is going out the front door with nothing on. But it is before that ever happens. So go home and change those light bulbs. Especially, anybody here from long-term care? Oh, good. Oh, nice, nice. You really do walk on water. The second one is one I touched on with Charlie not being terribly sure that I loved him anymore. And that is the emotion behind the words is the only thing that matters. The words are failing. The emotions are not. When he learned this, that how we laugh with the patient can make all the difference in the world. When I had this support group with the patients many years ago, and you'll know in a minute how many years ago it was, we wrote a letter, and we wrote the letter to our senators. And Kerry and Kennedy were the senators at the time. And this was an issue about Medicare and Alzheimer people. And we wrote this letter, and everybody in the group, it happened to be a men's group, and there were 12 men in the group, and everybody gave something, and I wrote it, I was the scribe, and they said, read it back. And I read it back, and they gave each other high fives and hugs and high tens. And if they could have done 15s, they would have. They were so proud of this beautiful letter. And I mailed it. And yes, we heard back from both of our senators at the time. And it was probably 10 days later when I ran into Jackie, a member of the group, in my local supermarket. And he saw me and recognized me and came over, and we gave a hug over the broccoli. And he said, aren't we good? And I said, you are so good, Jackie. You did a great job. And he said, I know it. What the hell did we do? He had no recollection at all of writing the letter. What did he have? He had the emotion. And then he said something very, very funny that really thought was great. He said, I'm so glad I met you here and not one of those other guys in the group. Amen. Because then none of us would have known what we did. Sharing the fact that all of them were equal. A short time ago, we were in the group and talking about what was the most profound thing for each gentleman in the group. What was the loss that bothered them the most? And each one went around telling what it was that was most difficult for them. And one of the fellows in our group, Bernie had a terrible time with words. Word finding and using them and making sentences, and it was really, it was profound. But we could say to Bernie, would you go into the kitchen and get the sugar? And Bernie would go into the kitchen and bring back the sugar. But he wasn't able to put out his language. So when we got to Bernie, and Bernie was at the time 83 years old, and when we got to Bernie said, oh, my loss of, and he tried so hard. And all the fellows at the same time in the group together said to him, Bernie, your loss of words, we know, your loss of words. And Bernie said, no, my loss of worth. loss of worth is what Bertie was feeling. Well, this might surprise you, but most of our Alzheimer people at some time or other feel a loss of worth. They feel that they're not part of the family anymore. There's been a change in relationships. There's been a change in roles, and they feel a lack of worth. And I don't want to suggest that we do it. We're partly responsible. You see, Alzheimer's disease will never take away somebody's dignity. We do it. We do it. We do it with the way we treat them, thinking it is the best way possible. We need to stop and think, am I including her in our conversation? Is Mama part of what we're saying, even if she can't speak anymore? At Thanksgiving time a few years back, Emmy came into our group. Emmy was a sweet, gentle, precious, elderly woman who came in and sat down. And she looked around, and people in the group said, "Oh, Emmy, what's the matter?" And you know what Emmy said? Well, this is for those of you who are married also. Emmy said, "Nothing." You all recognize that? You all know then that when your loved one says nothing is wrong, and the best thing in the world you can do is say, "That's good," and turn around, just turn your back on it. Because the minute I did that, Emmy said, wait a minute, I'll tell you. This is what Emmy said, and I hope you really hear this one. Emmy said, "For 40 years I have made apple strudel for Thanksgiving dinner. This year my daughter walked in and said, 'Mom, go watch Oprah while I make the apple strudel.'" And you know what Emmy said? She said, "Darn it all." That's not quite what she said, but "Darn it all," said Emmy, "I could have rolled the dough." Do you understand? I can still do something. I can do something. Help me. Help me to be able to do whatever it is. And there was my beloved, standing with a Teflon frying pan in his left hand and an SOS scouring pad in his right hand. And I thought, never the twain should meet. At that precise moment, little Wendy called and said she needed some help with her spelling, and Jason needed his diaper changed, and Scott was doing something, and Kristen needed help, and I thought, okay, this is where I made the decision, homework or Teflon? Homework won. I left him with the Teflon and the frying pan, and I went to help the children. And one by one, we got through everything we needed to do. And I realized suddenly that an hour and a half had gone by. And I thought, oh, where is he? Because he had never been anywhere for an hour and a half. Usually he was on Route 9. He went to bed smiling. He got up the next morning smiling. Did he remember? No, of course not. But it stayed. The emotion is still there. It stays intact. I'm looking at my watch because you're all going to be emotional in a minute. The third one says, focus on the remaining skills. What do you think I did the next day? I bought 2 more Teflon frying pans. One for me that I hid, and one for Charlie. Help him, help her to realize that you want her to roll the dough. And if you're worried about how she's going to roll the dough, then, get 2 pie crusts and let her roll 1. I need you is what we want to say to this person. I need your advice. How does this look on? No, don't say that. You can ask them. I had a lovely jacket on like yours on Halloween, that wonderful bright orange, and I just loved it. I was on an Alzheimer's unit, and I wore my bright orange jacket, and one of the ladies came up to me and she said, "Wow." I said, do you like it? And she said, "Yeah, if you like great big pumpkins." It's always Isn't that sweet? Know that Alzheimer people always tell it like it is. They do. Ask them anything that you really want the answer to. And they'll give it to you. They have lost the art of lying. Isn't that wonderful? Never question, never chastise. If you question the person with Alzheimer's, it doesn't make them better. It makes them sadder. It makes them more aware of what their losses are. One question to ask, and that is, how are you? Isn't it a lovely day? Something like that. And we tend to want to improve their memories by asking them questions all the time. Do you remember what you had for lunch today? No, I didn't have any lunch. You never feed me. We asked them, do you know what you did last week? Do you know who this is? No, no, no. Never ask a question, no matter how well functioning the person is. Engage them. You know that long-term memories are the very best you can have, the long-term memories. Create moments for success. We're the only ones who can do that. I had to buy him the Teflon frying pan to make him feel successful. And that's okay. That's all right if it gave him the chance to feel that way. I'm looking at my watch and I'm looking at the paper here, and I've gone over time, and I'm so sorry. Let me add, I'm supposed to stop talking at 11:15. Is that what you all have? Yes. Aren't you wonderful? If the person really does care, you might go out and do what you have to do. When we're talking about getting lost in our group and talking about those things, those frustrating, isolating, numb, exhaustive things that happen, because a support group is the place to do that. How many of you are in a support group? All right. When you all leave, you make sure you have Julie McMurray's number from the Alzheimer's Association and get yourselves in a support group. It is singularly the thing that will save your lives. Connect with the Alzheimer's Association and get into a group. We have a gentleman, a husband who has Alzheimer's, and his wife is in the group, and her biggest problem, it's a huge one, is the driving issue. Should she still be driving? That's a big issue. And somebody in the group said, don't you feel afraid that when he goes out, he might get lost? And she said, no, I'm afraid he won't. It's okay to feel that way in a group. She's frustrated. She is definitely frustrated. She has tried everything to stop him from driving. Any of you going through that one? Big one. Again, the Alzheimer's Association can help you with that. It's huge. I want to take time for questions, because to me that really is the most important, if you have a question, because I didn't want to come with my agenda. I want to know what yours is. Does anybody have a question, or have I completely made you know everything you ever have to know about a care partner? Who's got a question? Yes. What a wonderful question. How did my children do growing up in that environment? Well, now that they are adults, reasonable adults, they tell me something that I didn't know 35 years ago, and that is the most difficult thing for them was the embarrassment, because their dad was different than other people's dad. But what saw them through? I will tell you that when my older son Scott reached the ripe old age of 12, he went out in front of our house with the hairdryer and pointed it at cars that were going too fast. This is the same young man who, when he was in college, would go into a restaurant and see a young girl that he thought was kind of interesting, and he'd sit beside her and keep looking down at the floor until the young lady would say, "What are you looking for?" And he would say, "Oh, I dropped my Congressional Medal of Honor." Oh, can you imagine what that did to that dear heart? However, he grew up and he is still a very nice young man. Yes, he is. All my children, each and every one of them, are doing things for other people, and that makes me so darn proud. And now I've started lying about my kid's age. My oldest son is 50. I say 34. It makes me feel so much better. And Jason, let me tell you something about Jason, because it really doesn't have anything to do with Alzheimer's, but it has everything to do with hope. And when we talk about Alzheimer's, we must talk about hope. We must have it. I lost a little bit of hope when my son Jason went out to teach at the University of California at Berkeley. And what I discovered about this precious son of mine was that he was definitely a hypochondriac. Y'all know what that is? Jason would call home 3 or 4 times a week, and this is how our conversation would go. "Mom, I've got a cold in my nose." And I'd say, "Why don't you go to the infirmary, Jason?" And then it was a pain in his something or other, and his headaches that just wouldn't go away, and I kept saying, "Go to the infirmary, Jason." Smiled, grit my teeth. And all the time I'm thinking, I'm never going to have grandchildren. Who wants to marry a hypochondriac? I am happy to report that 4 years ago, June, Jason married his doctor. Where do you think she was a doctor? At the infirmary. Lucky her. Lucky Rachel, I think she married him because it was easier. So don't ever lose hope. Who's got a question? Yes.
What do you do when you have a person who is the caregiver and refuses to get help?
Oh, the caregiver refuses to get help? Yes. All you can do is make help available. You can let friends and neighbors, this is a really important one, I think. Let friends and neighbors say to them, don't ask, what can I do to help? Because what is the person going to say? I'm fine. I'll be there at 2 o'clock tomorrow. Whether you want me or not, I'm going to be there. You can do with your time whatever you want. That's what we need to do. I will be there. Give a specific time and be there. I'll be there every Tuesday for an hour. And after a while, the care partner gets used to the fact that this friend or relative, our relatives seem to disappear also. You know, when we do this, we find that after a while, the care partner thinks, oh, I might as well get my hair done or go to the library. I might as well get to the barber shop or something. All we can do is give information to the care partner. We can make sure that we've done the things. Are you the care partner?
No, my sister.
Okay, I just thought I should ask that just in case. Get your sister to the Alzheimer's Association, or you get the information from Julie. Find out what can be done to help her. I think one of the biggest issues we have in care partnering for Alzheimer's is the fact that there is so much denial. Denial, it makes it easier for some people, and for some, maybe that's okay. But for most of us, we need help. Get the information, give it to her, make sure she has it, and that she knows. And if you feel like you're talking about it all the time and you don't want to get on her back, forget that. Get on her back and talk about it all the time. If she doesn't get help, she will burn out. There you go.
You had said something about you don't want to go to house anymore.
Yep. Do you feel that way? You've got to try to help her. All you can do is try to help her. You can't, I wish you could bring Julie home with you. No, that would be lovely, if that were the case, but you can't do that. You can only tell her. You can give her a copy of Learning to Speak Alzheimer's. A great little book.
We've done all that. We've done that because everyone comes in and does a different feedback. I'm going to these different things. I try to give it the information. And I said, and she'll turn on. I'll do it when I feel that it's necessary. But we all know that she
That's right. The family, all the family and friends know that she's burning out. And she says, no, I'm fine. I'll let you know. There's nothing you can do if she is the primary caregiver, unless you think in any sense of the word there might be abuse of any sort. That's verbal, remember, that's verbal as well. And then you call Nick.
My friend has asked her sons to leave and to never come back to her house.
Where are you?
She's become rather reclusive and paranoid. She doesn't want anyone in total denial. One of my big concerns is her driving and what is real and what is not real. And
what's real and what's not real, if it's not harmful to her, really is of no consequence. Do you know what a fiblet is? Do you know what a fiblet is? It's one of the things that's going to see you through this. A fiblet is a lie that God forgives us for. Fiblets makes life easier with an Alzheimer patient. You agree with them. You agree with whatever they say, no matter how ridiculous it may sound, because that's what they're looking for, is validation. They don't want to know, where is my winter coat? You stole it. Oh, I didn't steal it. I put it in storage, even though you know she got rid of it 13 years ago. I put it in storage so it would be safe for you. I want to see my mother. Have you heard that one? I'm sure you have. You will if you haven't. And you say, I'd like to see her too. You don't say, she's been gone for 40 years. You say, I'd like to see her too. Let's make some cocoa while we wait for her. Because we have no attention span. Remember, that thought's gone in minutes. But watch what happens when you start agreeing with things, even with things that sound like they're paranoid and delusional and things like that. My husband used to sit on the bed at 3 o'clock in the afternoon as happy as he could be, looking at the walls in the bedroom. That's all he was doing. He was sitting there looking at the walls in the bedroom. And one day I came in and I needed him for something. So I tried to get his attention and I closed the curtains in the room that was kind of, darkened a little bit. And he looked at me and he said, where are the dancers? Where are the dancers? He was watching the reflection of the trees outside the window on the wall. And he saw the Folies Bergère or something. But it made him happy. I opened the curtains and made sure that he could see his dancers whenever possible. A little pang in my heart, but I let him watch them. Do you have a question, someone?
Let me ask you a personal question. What was your husband's profession?
He was a writer. He was a writer. It was so hard when the first thing to go was his ability to write anymore. He hung up papers like this all over the dining room. Every night he would sit in the dining room and write things and scotch tape them onto our walls. And then he'd come down the next day, not recall in the least that he had written anything. He would say, get those things out of the way so I can get going. And I'd take them down and he'd start all over again. That was really probably one of the first signs, was when he started having problems with writing. Thank you for asking that. I don't mind personal questions. Yes?
Mine's also a personal question. I wondered where you fit into getting help for yourself, with raising the family. And, I'm just thinking about that finance.
How did I get help for myself? There was no Alzheimer's Association at the time. The physician who we found, who finally diagnosed him, didn't know how to pronounce Alzheimer's. That's where we were in those days. I wasn't particularly good at getting help for myself. I will tell you a story that will show you how I got help for me. One day, Charlie's sister had come to take us out for lunch. And she was parked outside, and Julie's heard this, so she's giggling already. I went out to my sister-in-law and said, he'll be out in a minute, he's getting dressed. And so I stood beside the car, kind of chatting with her, when the front door opened and out he came. Not that bad, no. He had on red plaid golfing pants. I think he had cut the legs to make them shorter. Red plaid, I think they were polyester, plaid, got it? On the top he had a pink sports shirt, the Hawaiian kind, with pink hibiscus. Oh, wait, it gets better. On the top of his head, he had a red plastic fireman's hat, Jason's. It was about this big, right up here, right, sitting on top. He had one green sock, one blue sock, if memory serves me. And out he came. And if any of you read the book, you will recognize the Wicked Witch of the West. That's what I called my sister-in-law. She looked at him and said, you look like a clown. I'm not taking you out to lunch looking like that. And I looked in the car and I thought, oh my. Because I'm thinking one thing only. You know what it was? He dressed himself. He dressed himself. Well, he turned around and he walked back into the house with his head hanging. And I turned to the WWW and I said, you know, I think you should come back to visit us another time, preferably in about 6 months. And I walked inside the house, because getting rid of people who cause you to have a problem with your Alzheimer person, those are not the people. And I knew I wasn't going to be able to start some sort of an education process, since I was still going through it myself. I went in the house after she had left, and he was sitting there on the bed with his head hanging, and I reached out my hand and I said, let's go for a walk. And we walked around our neighborhood. Everybody in our neighborhood knew what was the matter with Charlie, because we told them all. We let them know. Now, some of you are going to be abashed at that. I don't even like my neighbors. Well, I didn't like most of them either, but I thought they should know, just in case he might come to their door or whatever. So I let everybody know in the neighborhood. And what happened was, we were walking around and people were waving and saying, how you doing? Hey, Chow, how about those Red Sox? How about those Red Sox? And different things like that. And it was just wonderful and delightful. And that's what we continue to do. Be very, very open about it. To tell whoever we possibly could, and to laugh whenever we could. I told Charlie when we were sitting back, I showed him the hat, and I put it on, and I said, how does it look on me? Oh, he was horrified that I would wear it, and I said, you had it on, and we laughed. He had a great way of laughing at himself. One last question, I promise.
If you had a relative that has passed of dementia, should you still yourself join the support group?
What a beautiful question. I'm sure the Alzheimer's Association will address this too this afternoon. I didn't want to say Julie again. When the person who's had Alzheimer's has passed, is a wonderful time for you to be in a support group. And the thing that I've discovered is that, as myself, I'm there primarily to say, I made it and this worked for me. Maybe it'll work for you. It would be great if we could say, everybody do this. Try this, it might work. And you have the chance to give back as well. as to get the help that you need. Dealing with Alzheimer's and losing someone to Alzheimer's is so unique. So unique. And the only way that people can really help us is if they've been through it. If they've been through it. And that's what a group is. It's made up of people who have been through it. Let me end with just a quick little story. And the story is about Robert Fulghum, who wrote one of the greatest books, or the greatest title anyway, which is Everything You Ever Wanted to Learn, You Learned in Kindergarten. Isn't that a wonderful title? Well, I happen to adore him. He's one of my favorite writers, and he's written many books. And I read one, and it had little vignettes in it, and one of the vignettes was talking about his little daughter, Molly. And he said Molly had handed him a brown paper bag one morning when he was leaving for work. And he took it and said, "Thank you, Molly," and took his other brown paper bag that had his lunch in it, and off he went. He got to the office, and he is what is described as a type A personality, going thing after thing, and he realized it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and he hadn't eaten. He went into his office, and he tore open his lunch, and he wolfed down his sandwich, threw the remains into the basket, and then saw Molly's bag. And he tore that open, and he emptied the contents onto his desk. There were 5 shiny pennies. He put those in his pocket. There were 3 broken tubes of Mummy's lipstick. There were 10 marbles. And there was a little pink plastic dinosaur. Well, he looked at this array of Molly's things and kind of chuckled and cleared off his desk. And he didn't get home until 8:30 that night, and Molly was waiting for him. And she said, Daddy, where's the bag I gave you? And he thought for a minute, and he said, "Oh, I left it in the office." And she said, "Oh, as long as you still have it, because that bag had all my treasures in it." Well, Robert Fulghum went back to work that night, and he went into his wastebasket before the janitor got there. And he took out all the things, took the pennies out of his pocket, and he put them back in the bag and sealed the bag with Scotch tape, with staples, with all kinds of things. And he brought it home and put it in his closet. When Robert Fulghum wrote this story, he says, it is 32 years later now. And if my house were to burn down, the first thing I'd get would be Molly's brown paper bag, because it taught me such a valuable lesson. And I think this is such an Alzheimer's story, because the valuable lesson is it doesn't matter what the brown paper bag looks like. The good stuff, the treasures, are still on the inside. Thank you.